This podcast is sponsored by Cornerstone Healing Center, where they guide people through a transformative experience and into lasting recovery. They focus on addiction, trauma, family systems, and co-occurring disorders. If you want more information on how to get sober, call them at 1-888-320-7992 or check out their website, scottsdalecornerstone.com. Hey everyone, it's Brandon Lee with another episode of Escaping Rock Bottom, the podcast. I really do have a great guest today. His name is Jeff from the Valley here. Has a great story of his experience, strength, and hope. He's got a little bit of relapse out there. I know it's a message that I want to hear. I've actually gotten so many people messaging me in my inbox, telling me about how they've been struggling during this pandemic, how they're navigating, how they're surviving their own mental health. Maybe they've stumbled, maybe they fall, they have got the shame and the guilt, they don't want to go back to those AA meetings. Here's my message to those who relapse as we begin this podcast, is that listen, if you had 3, 4, 5 years of experience and you stumbled, you fell, you don't lose all of that experience and that knowledge that you gained in recovery. You pick it back up and you continue on your journey. So without further ado, I want to bring in Jeff into the podcast. Jeff has a few relapses he'll share with us today, but the great part is he's got experience, strength, and hope. And just by chatting with him over the last 30 minutes or so, he seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders. Life's going pretty well for him right now. So going to bring Jeff into the conversation. It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
All right, awesome. So born and raised where?
Here, North Phoenix.
Okay, so this is like the third podcast guest I've had in a row. They were actually natives, and I've been here for almost like 8 years, and I never meet natives.
I've heard that. That's a thing. Yeah, that's a thing out there.
It's like a real thing. There are natives.
We're a very elusive bunch. Yeah.
So I'm on this like roll right now, meeting a bunch of natives, which is actually pretty cool. So you were born and raised here. Take me back to a little bit of your childhood. What was it like growing up in Jeff's world here in the Valley?
Well, the family I came from was great, generally speaking. You know, you get older and you realize that there's like layers of dysfunction that you thought was normal, and you start to break these fogs, like, you know, one after the other. And that's a part of, I guess, you know, hopefully evolving as a human. But you know, my family was good. I didn't come from a household where there was like abuse, alcoholism, really. Not until later on, you know, did I notice that there was sort of an issue with one of my parents. But yeah, they were like church going folks, and they weren't like super weird, like picketing and those kind of like Christians, but they were just like normal, you know, folks. And so I got a good upbringing. I was never, you know, told I was, you know, less than, or, you know, beat up or abused or anything like that. So it was good, but my parents got divorced when I was 9.
Okay, so even that, and I tell people, because I never want to minimize people's traumas and traumatic experiences, especially as a child. So I did suffer some child sex abuse. I was physically abused, But what I tell people is that my trauma, don't ever compare traumas, right? Because something that may be traumatic to one child may not be traumatic to another person. But just going even through a divorce can actually be very traumatic for a child.
It's funny that you say that too, because for many years, it's weird. So true. That's 100% spot on. And I felt really weird because I would look at, you know, you see things on television or movies or whatever, and you're just like, you know, I've got a big extended family, aunts and uncles, grandparents who did these huge, you know, I would always look back at like, oh, like Nana, and the Christmas Eves and Christmas mornings were just so, there was so much love and vibrancy. And I was always made to feel like I was a special, not like special, like you're better than, but special, like you're just like every human, you know, it's like you have possessed within you the ability to think and to dream and to fight and to work and to have ambitions and drive and be whatever the hell you want to be. And so I was really, stuff was instilled in me. And so I would see these kids abused, you know, wherever it was on, you know, maybe movie. And I would be like, what the hell do you have to bitch about? Your parents got divorced. Stop being like a pussy. And so, in a weird way, unbeknownst to me, that was turned into a way for me to sort of sweep it under the rug and not deal with certain things. Because what ultimately happened here's the bottom line is like in recovery, we talk about like these complete psychic changes that you sort of, have to get if you're going to sort of be propelled into a new way of life or compelled or whatever. I had a complete psychic change, but it was just like the opposite. It was like immediately, it was like something inside me just switched. And here's the way I look at it now. I didn't know if I quite could articulate it like this at 9. I'm sure I couldn't. It was like the foundation of my life, of my worldview, of my perspective, and the certainty I had, a level of certainty that I needed to have in a worldview in order to feel safe and secure within this world. Not just by virtue of the nurture in terms of safety and security that I got from my parental figures. That's one level of sort of safety and security, like nurture. But I'm talking about specifically like we all need a level of certainty and foundation so that we can, it's like concrete under your feet so that we can then build on that into new areas of life. Without that safety, certainty, whatever you want to call it, and the fundamental sources of that security and safety were torn apart. And so I feel like in a way, the way that I internalized the divorce was that my whole paradigm shattered. My worldview became, so the world prior to that was it inherently, there was potential and opportunity in the world. And just like that, my world became a dark place and a hostile environment in which I had to sort of fight, claw, and whatever I had to do to get the things that I needed out of life. And it wasn't like I was walking around, like a bully, like beating people up. They didn't have that edge to it. Rather, how it manifested was depression, just depression and anger. So anyway.
So when did you first start dabbling with like hardcore drugs? Like where did that even enter your psyche and enter your life?
Hardcore 14.
Okay. So
Yeah.
I was about 15. I got into cocaine. And the moment, the moment that drug hit my body and I explained to people, I said, it felt so good and it felt so numb. And at age 15, we don't have the life experience to understand why. The only thing I could tell people is that at age 15, when I was presented that opportunity to do a line of cocaine and I did it, that feeling of, I felt like Superman, like nothing could harm me, nothing can hurt me. I felt invincible. And I just knew at that moment it felt good. Whatever it took me out of, it felt good. And I just wanted to chase that feeling good again that next weekend. Can I get more of that white stuff that we did last weekend back in Laguna Beach? And I just became chasing that all the time, not realizing why I wanted to chase it, just that like I loved not being in my reality back then.
100%. Yeah. So is the question like when, or is the question more?
When did you first start hitting it? You said 14, 15, something like that.
Yeah, 14.
And then what drug was it, may I ask?
The first like narcotic I did outside of it was Vicodin.
Okay. So,
yeah, straight up. I took 3 7.5 milligram Vicodins at one time. And I just remember it hitting me, and it was just like, I mean, if I took 3 now, 7.5 hydrocodones, I'd be on a good one. So when I'm 14, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you
120.
calculate your body weight then. All right, fast forward again. So take me back to where you hit that next rock bottom. Like what was that tectonic shift that sent you to your rock bottom that first time, that where Jeff looked at your life and said, hey, I should probably get some help? Or I should probably stop doing what I'm doing?
Oh my gosh. Probably a bunch of times. Because here's the thing though, is I didn't have, and I had a normal childhood up until the time I was 9 years old. Then I got sort of shuffled between my mom and dad because my mom, God bless her, couldn't handle me in my rage without a man in the house to, put his foot down. And my dad just left. So she had to. At 14, I went to live with my dad. I was in 8th grade. He didn't make me go to school, so I didn't have like the normal societal sort of immediate peer group
or even the structure.
No structure.
No structure.
No structure at all. There was no bedtimes. There was no waking up. There was no like chores. There was no dinners.
Let me even point that out because like I always tell people the way the brain works is that when we suffer some sort of a traumatic experience, right, it throws off our wiring and we just start to really misfire. People always go like, why can't I make the right decision? Like I feel like I'm always choosing the wrong person in my life, choosing the wrong boyfriend, choosing the wrong girlfriend, or every decision I make just seems to be the wrong one. Yeah, because whether it's a traumatic experience or an experience where there is no structure, right, to keep those wires aligned, right, it's going to throw us off, right?
100%.
The anger and the rage and the no structure, we're just constantly putting ourselves into bad situations.
Yeah, completely. So let me try to answer your question as best as I can. At 15, I think I got busted with some pot. I was on probation. My gosh. I wanted to say I was about to say that was the first time I'd been to jail, but I think I had actually been to Durango when I was like 10 years old because that's a whole other thing. Because of domestic, like my mom couldn't control me and I was putting holes in the walls and stuff. And they were like, we're going to, scare this kid straight. And
Right.
So I ended up getting busted with some pot, ended up on juvenile probation, went to jail, couldn't piss clean in a cup. Ever. And so they kept saying like, oh, we're going to try to help this kid out. What's the best that we can do? Well, we have to show him a natural consequence for his behavior. So let's put him in jail for a few weeks. But when you're in jail as a juvenile for a few weeks, it's not like you have a TV and a day room like you do in most jail facilities now as an adult anyways. And you're stuck in a cell 24 hours a day by yourself. And it's just like, and you have a lot of time to think. And there's many times in there where I was like, I'm not going to do this again. I can't do this again. So, I mean, we might think about those as rock bottoms, but then, so I never really got off probation my whole juvenile life. And then at 18, at 17, I absconded. I took off from Phoenix and actually went up to Prescott to live with friends. And then at 18, a month after my 18th birthday, I got caught in an armed robbery. For an armed robbery charge, which is a whole other story. But I'll suffice it to say, I ended up in jail again, strung out, in jail, looking at my life. Get out on it. I was in there for 6 months. They kicked me out on intense probation. I went to treatment, get out, 8 days later, connected with some guy, and I'm high again. But every single one of these times, essentially, when I was sitting in the hotel room, absconded from intense probation in Prescott after a 6-month jail sentence, deferred only because I was going to go to, really, it's a 5-year sentence that was deferred because they're like, we're not going to put you in jail, prison yet. And so many of these experiences I had where I'm just like, what am I doing? And then it ultimately happened much later when I ultimately got sober when I was 26.
Wow. Okay, so I got sober when I was 28. So we were kind of around that same time frame.
Yeah.
For me, when I finally decided to hit my rock bottom, it was just kind of thrown in front of my face. I was at a brothel in the slums of Los Angeles, super high. I blacked out, cracked my head open.
Meth. Yeah, oh yeah.
Meth and G. It was a combination. So
I've never done. You mean a GHB?
GHB.
Yeah.
So it was a combo. So I would do GHB and meth at the same time.
Yeah.
There's nothing like a big upper and a downer right into your system to make you feel great. And so I blacked out, cracked my head open, ended up in the ER. In a coma for about a week, and then came to, and that wasn't my rock bottom. I actually ripped myself away from all the cords and the machines that I was hooked up to. They were supposed to do brain surgery that night, and I refused to let them do brain surgery. So I walked right out of the hospital in my hospital gown, got in my car, did more meth and more GHB, woke up a week later in the hospital, and that was my rock bottom. A little woman finally coming to this little nurse holding my hand, asking me if I believed in God. And I said, hell no, I don't believe in God. And she goes, that's okay, because, God still believes in you. And so I went to her church after I got out, and it was an AA meeting, and been sober ever since.
Holy crap.
It was intense. But that was, again, my rock bottom. But you decide to get sober, right? In your late 20s, right? You decide to clean up your act. How long were you able to stay sober that first time?
I got sober from 26. I was sober for 5
years?
Yeah.
What was it like? Like, what were those 5 years like for you that first time you got sober?
I mean, my life radically changed. So I can't really describe that without specifically commenting on. When I was 26, I was living with my mom. I was a 5-time convicted felon. At that point, if we're fast forwarding to 26, I'd spent a little over 4.5 years between jail and prison. From 18 to 23, right? And then I'm living with my mom. I've got a PO that's telling me go back to treatment or go back to prison. My mom's like, she's finally getting to the place where she's just like, look, I can't watch you do this to yourself anymore. There's a couple of times where I was sort of like mumbling incoherently to myself and talking sort of wild-eyed about these conversations I'd had with like dead rock stars, and like in my delusion or delirium or whatever, it's like I'm having like a full-blown like a 2-way conversation with like Lane Staley or like like Kurt Cobain or something, and I remember this look on her face, and so where when somebody looks at you and you can, even in your delirious state of mind, you can kind of pick up on, you're maybe cognizant enough to know that the look in their eyes when they're looking back at you says, what the fuck is wrong with this person? I'm severely alarmed about them and what they're saying. And I connected with that. Anyway, so I'm living with my mom, 5-time convicted felon. I can't work. I'm unemployable. No, it's not like it's a bad economy. It's like I'm white and ashen, and I've got track marks, and I've got an abscess on my thing right here, on my forearm right here, and I'm just a real mess. And everything in my life revolves around using, at that point it was really heroin, and then I was very afraid to go back to prison because I'd made some enemies in prison, and I just didn't want to go back. And so I went to treatment at 26. July 24th, 2009 is when I walked into treatment, and my whole life, and I know I'm getting, in my typical long-winded fashion, I'm getting way out there. To answer your question, I had this sort of depression when I wasn't using drugs and alcohol that might best be described as like a catatonic depression, where like the life, and I say this all the time, like in meetings and stuff, it's like the life, I don't know how else to put it, the life force that exists inside of somebody for them to answer a question that's asked of them verbally by somebody in their life, whether it's mom or even a nurse or a doctor or whatever, the life force to respond to somebody almost didn't even exist, to the extent that somebody could ask me a question, and not even somebody I was trying to be a dick to, but just somebody, mom asking me a very, innocuous or harmless question is just, how are you doing today? And it's like, the weight of the world was so heavy on me that I felt like I couldn't even get an answer out. The idea of walking across my bedroom to go to the bathroom to pee was just like it just took like an act of providence to get me out of bed to even relieve myself. I mean, that was the kind of depression when I wasn't high. And so what happened when I got sober was, and this is why I think that I would love to talk to Sam Harris about this, right? Who's a brilliant mind, hardcore atheist, or any of these guys. Here's the thing. I'm not a proponent of, I'm not necessarily a proponent of faith and religious belief.
Right.
I'm a proponent of logical thought. But what I can't define, or what I can't quantify medically, scientifically, or psychologically, is how, when what's the program director, over at Maverick House suggested that I pray and, hit my knees and pray, no less. And a week later, he checked in with me and he asked me how I felt. And it dawned on me, hadn't connected prior to that, the days prior, until the words came out of my mouth. And I said, I haven't thought about, and I answered him honestly, I hadn't thought about using for days or a week since I'd started this stupid prayer exercise. Furthermore, the depression was gone. Like I felt alive in a way that I maybe never felt, or if I had, it was when I was 8 or 9 years old, since I was a kid. And I don't know how to describe what they call a religious or spiritual experience in terms that make sense medically, scientifically, or psychologically, because it seems to defy all of those things. And yet it is so common of an experience amongst alcoholics and drug addicts, where one day we're just in the dirt and we do a couple of stupid things, whether it's go to a meeting, call your sponsor, pray, help somebody, whatever, pick up the chairs after a meeting, make coffee. And then a few months, a month, 6 months, whatever goes by. And you're like, I haven't thought about using in 3 months. And furthermore, I just saw a bird fly by the window and I got goosebumps and chills, and a tear fell down my face. It's like, what the hell? I'm different. And so that's what happened to me, and I was sober for 5 years.
Okay, so I experienced a lot of that too. I think the first year of recovery was a little dark for me. I didn't experience necessarily that amazing pink cloud that so many people experience, which is totally fine because I
don't know if so many people experience that though. Well, I think that
I heard it a lot in the rooms, right? You'd hear it a lot in the rooms, right?
Sure.
People talking about that pink cloud experience, in that first year. But for me, it was dark.
Okay.
It was really dark. I was doing a lot of that, like peeling back the onions with my sponsor.
Yeah.
And so it was dark for me. That being said, eventually, when I look back in that first year or two, I started to see moments, right? I started to see moments of, because I wasn't a faith believer and I wasn't a God believer. I grew up hardcore in the Catholic Church, was forced on me, was forced communion, went to all boys prep Catholic high school, had nuns and priests around me all the time. So I knew what religion was. I knew what organized religion was.
Straight up.
And I really just didn't want any part of it.
Same.
I just did not. I did not have a good experience growing up in it. So did not want another part of it. That being said, when I started to do my 4-step in recovery, in that first round of recovery that I was in, and I was doing a lot of that written work, it was in that written work where I had really seen that, okay, wow, Brandon, you definitely should have been dead. Wow, Brandon, here's another experience, brother, you were dead. You should be dead. It was enough of those experiences to where my sponsor in the program looked at me one day and said, damn, dude, what more evidence do you need to be shown to you that, brother, something greater is around you that is keeping you alive for some purpose that you haven't discovered yet? But man, you should be dead 10 times over. You should not be sitting here in front of me. Do you at least believe something is keeping you alive? There could be something greater than you out there that's keeping you alive. And it was really at that moment that I allowed the belief of something spiritual or something greater that is around me, that is trying to keep me alive for something bigger than myself.
Sure.
And that was what I kind of grasped onto.
Yeah.
To hold on to that spiritual element in the program.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that your experience is, in terms of the first year being, more on the difficult side, is very common as well. I think that the experience that I had the first time, that's just the first time, which did not repeat itself in the other times that I got sober, I think that's generally more unique. And struggling is probably more commonplace. But yeah, my this idea, I'm kind of a weird when it comes to, I don't know if it's weird actually. I think it's probably really common. When I'm around a bunch of true believers, I sort of feel like I'm more atheist agnostic. And when I'm around a bunch of atheists, I feel like I'm a true believer. So I don't necessarily know, which camp I belong in. But what I would like to do is I would very much love, I wish I could just ask like a guy like Sam Harris this question, like, how do you explain the phenomenon of what they call religious experience, where somebody is one way, lives their entire life or many years of their life one way, and is then touched or compelled by something that we don't know or can't comprehend or define adequately, that we just call God, because what the F else do we call it? It's like, we have to arrive at something so we know kind of what we're talking about, but it's this, we can't really wrap our minds around it, to be compelled or drawn into or touched by this thing to the extent that worldviews crumble, shift, and radically change. I think it's one of the most fascinating questions that there is to ask. And it happens a whole bunch, whether it's a year or 6 months or whatever. What I do today is, as it relates specifically to the question of, God or higher power and spirituality and all that stuff, is I act as if Ram Dass has this great saying. It's like, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's essentially, he's like, I've got many beliefs, none of which I care are true. It's like, wear the world like a loose fucking garment. You know what I mean? Like, we can all have all kinds of beliefs, but don't get so tied into a belief system or an ideology that it has to be right at all costs, because then you're not malleable, and right. You have to be malleable in life. To an extent. You
have to be. And not only do you have to be malleable in that extent, but you also have to believe in the science of neuroplasticity, that our brains are also malleable, right?
Yeah.
Because if they weren't, we would never be able to rewire to be able to string a few years of recovery together.
Sure.
The way we have damaged the wiring of our brains through meth or through heroin or through other hardcore drug use, it takes so much time to repair that wiring, but it can be done, right? The work can be done when you do that work, that the brain can be rewired, because our brains are malleable, and we can redesign our brains in order to be functional.
Yeah, I heard you talking about that on the I think that was the last podcast that you did that I listened to. I love that. That's so true. And I love that you talk about that. You're sort of turned on to that whole...
Well, yeah, because I do believe in the science. I believe in the science behind it. It's the one issue that I do have with the traditional, just kind of the AA program, and that
Sure.
I really wish the book would be updated and written with the new advancements of science. Because I always believe in this model, AA plus. AA plus what? Like AA, that's it?
Right.
Like the damage that we have done to our brains, and the damage that we have to go repair so much more than AA will ever be able to heal. AA creates that foundation, right? That really rock solid foundation. We can kind of create that design for a living, which is so crucial and important to recovery. However, we have to also believe in the advancements of science. And if we really want the efficacy rate within recovery to be even higher. Like, I'm not satisfied at 50% or 60% with alcoholics. And then
Right.
we go to heroin, that number is way lower.
Right.
So what do we got to do that's different in order to string that together? But I want to talk about a little bit about a relapse and what got you into Cornerstone Healing Center.
Cool.
Because I always give people, brother, so much damn props when they could speak about their relapse, because so much shame, right, centers around somebody who's relapsed, with even
Sure.
in an AA program, like, how do I show my face in this room again? Or
Yeah.
how do I eventually, people are going to look at me like I'm a loser, right?
Yeah.
They're going to look at me like I'm a weak person because I relapsed. I want to get rid, right? I want to get rid of that stigma. I want to get rid of that shame, because it exists, right? Because it exists, and it might hinder somebody to continue to seek help.
Yeah.
Right? So tell me a little bit about what brought you to Cornerstone and what that experience was like for you this last time, because you are somebody who has relapsed, gotten treatment, relapsed, and then you're on this trajectory right now.
What I went into Cornerstone last year. So I think I was 2 years sober again. After relapsing at 5 years, sort of being off and on for about a year, 3 months sober, relapse a week or two or a weekend, 4 months sober, relapse. And then I put together, I think, like 2 years. Yeah. Cause it was 2017 through, no, it was a year and a half. who knows? Who gives a shit?
Yeah.
The bottom line so I had, my back went out really bad, and I took like, handfuls of ibuprofen and Tylenol for like 9 months or something like that every single day before I was just like, I got to go to the hospital. Fuck this. And I went to the hospital, and at the time I was sponsored by a guy who sort of wasn't overtly like, fuck pain pills in recovery, but he was just like, I didn't want to hear it. At that point, I was in so much pain, it started to drive me crazy. And I was really sort of in a bad relationship with like some work partners, and there was a lot of resentment and blah, blah, blah. I relapsed. The third time I went to the hospital, they gave me Percocet or whatever. I didn't tell anybody. Ended up relapsing, getting sober again, relapsing. Had surgery July 2nd on my back. I had back surgery, like major invasive surgery, July 2nd of 2019. I walked into Cornerstone on July 4th. I had surgery the 2nd, laid in bed, healed. The next day, did essentially the same thing. I could walk. I just had to be easy on myself. And I was just like, I went into Cornerstone on the 4th, and it was the best thing I ever did. And I'll tell, I don't know how relevant this is necessarily, but I had insurance, right? And I think this is, so I had insurance. Maybe this is relevant or not. But they weren't in network with Cornerstone. And so I was up against a decision. I could go to these treatment centers, or I could pay, a good amount of cash. So I had a conversation with my sponsor, who's still my sponsor and one of my best friends. I said, hey man, and I've never talked to him specifically about like money or not. I mean, not, they say pink and green, right? Things come up, relationships and finances, but romances, finances, but I'd never, and I said, look, this is what I'll make this year. This is how much money I have in savings. This is how much money they're asking. And he cuts me off in mid-sentence, and he says, and I said, or I could go to this insurance place, and, he says, do you want me to make this really easy on you? And I said, please. He said, pay the fucking money to Cornerstone, go there. And I called my buddy Saad, who's one of my best friends as well, and Estel, who owns Cornerstone, who's one of my best friends as well. And I said, let's roll, man. And the next day, they came and picked me up, and it was the best money I've ever spent. It was the best investment I've ever made, and it was the best thing that I could have possibly done, relating specifically to what you were just talking about, in terms of therapy and like AA plus, right? I still see my counselor there, my therapist, counselor, whatever you want to call her. I mean, Karen, I still see Karen. I was just at Karen's. I'm going tomorrow to see Karen. I was there last Monday because now she's seeing my mom and my sister. She sees my wife. She's about to see my brother, because now we're like, some of my stuff we're starting to get maybe a little bit out of the woods on. And now it's like, okay, well, I've got these really dysfunctional family dynamics. And so she's like seeing she's bringing us in as a group to break down. It's fucking the best thing in the world. It's amazing.
So what was different this time? Because you do have quite a few relapses, part of your journey. Well, what do you think was different this time compared to like the other prior times?
I try not to get too, you want to ask yourself that, because you feel, to some extent you feel like it's an important question to ask, because if you ask that question and find the answer, that answer will guide or inform future decisions. Right. For instance, if I find what's different about this time, I'll keep doing whatever differentiates this time from the last time. I don't necessarily think there's any difference necessarily, because the first time I got sober specifically, even the second time I got sober, I was given everything that I needed in those moments to really be able to excel. I got off track. I think the best thing about this experience here, specifically with Cornerstone, is meeting Karen, is being in a place where every other time I'd gotten sober, it was through the insurance. It was they were not the best treatment centers. Not to say that Cornerstone doesn't, take insurance. They do. They just didn't take, they didn't take mine at the,
Right.
when I was there last year. But I think that the fact that I'd never been in a position before where I paid for my own way in a way like that. I'd never, and check this out. So I was there for 52 days, thought I was going for 30. And I was coming up on my 30 and I was like, okay, when am I getting kicked out? They're like, oh, we don't know. You got to wait till family day. I'm like, when's family day? Oh, it's 2.5 weeks from now. I'm like, you got to be fucked. And I was pissed, right? And Estel in his typical sales guy fashion. And I'm like, dude, I got to go at 30 days. I got stuff to do. I got life to live. And he's like, how about we make a decision? He said something like this. It was amazing. He's like, how about we decide that whether you're here for 30 days or 300 days, that this is the last time that you're going to be in treatment. And I'm like, yeah, sounds great. And in my mind, I heard him say, look, you're out at 30 days. Of course he didn't say that. He totally sold me. And it was amazing the way he did it. He's a sharp character. So I'm digressing and I know that. But so I was in a financial position where if my wife would have said, until you finish Cornerstone, you're not coming back to the house, I could have said, fuck it, I'm going to go and get my own place. Could have paid 2 rents. I was never in a position before where rock bottom was not financial. Everything else was falling apart, but financially I was in a place where I could have said, fuck everybody. I'm doing my own thing. I don't care what you want. I can live in a hotel room for the next however many years. The difference now is that, and so I had a decision. Do you run because you can, or do you stay because you should? And the thing is I wanted to run so bad. My head was like, run, and my feet just wouldn't run. And I knew fundamentally more than I knew that I hated being back in treatment. And I think that if there's a difference, this might be a large part of it, is that I knew that if I ran as a 36-year-old man who had many relapses, if I ran, I couldn't tell you definitively, just like I can't tell you maybe where I'll end up if I have a drink tomorrow. I couldn't tell you when I would ever stop. And that thought scared me and sobered me in a manner of speaking more than any other thought. And I stayed at Cornerstone the full 52 days, did the full aftercare, the intense outpatient, and I still see Karen, every couple of weeks. And
what do you say to the people out there as we begin to kind of wrap up here? What do you say to the people out there who may be able to get a year and then, they stumble, they fall? Maybe they get a few more years, they stumble and they fall. What's your message to those people out there who struggle at times and they may relapse, but they know that that's not the life that they want? That they like the life of sobriety and recovery, but they have stumbled and they have fallen. What's your message to them?
Well, I mean, specifically relating to like relapsers, like coming back into the fray, into the fold of the meetings and stuff like that, is no one cares as much as you think that they care, and no one gives a shit. And the people that really do care that you like relapse in a sense that they're gonna like treat you differently, poorly because of it, they're losers anyways. Because anybody that's looking at somebody that's down, that's just a bully sort of mentality. Anybody who's a bully is like hurting on the inside. They're just and I'm not going to say loser, but I mean, screw them. But the thing is, I have my specific, over the years, I've sort of changed a little bit like you. I still am a member of 12-step programs, and I still go to meetings, and I still sponsor guys, and I still do all that stuff. But if you're like a chronic relapser and you've relapsed to maybe even once or certainly several times or a couple times, you need to do AA. You got to get into treatment, or a therapy. Get your ass into therapy, whether it's EMDR, some form of talk therapy, trauma therapy. It doesn't matter. Get your ass. I've found so much help in that. I would never say if you're a drug addict or an alcoholic, disregard AA and just do therapy. But what I would say is, like, I got a guy who called me this morning, 8:00 this morning, calls me. He says, "Hey man, I got to talk to you." He says, "Will you sponsor me?" I've known the guy for 11 years. Been struggling for well beyond even that. Been probably relapsing off and on, a year sober, relapsed for 20 something years. The guy's probably in his late 40s, early 50s. He doesn't know this yet, but I'm going to have a conversation with him when he calls me later or tomorrow, if he calls me back. I'm going to say, man, you got to get your ass into therapy.
Right.
I want that to be as much as your program. And some guys, you have to tell them that this needs to be as much of your program as going to meetings.
100%.
Commit to me that you're going to spend the money on yourself.
100%. I actually, as soon as we're done with this podcast, I have a 90-minute session with my trauma therapist.
Sweet.
I mean, that's what I do. I'm a huge believer of therapy and trauma therapy and EMDR light therapy, equine therapy. I don't care. Do whatever you need to do to help you rewire that trauma. Because for me, even the process of unpacking that trauma puts you in a very vulnerable state.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, it just does.
Yeah.
Right? You're peeling back so much pain and you are exposing yourself to so much pain that it's never a surprise to me when I hear people actually relapse while going through really traumatic therapy.
Sure.
Or even in the 4-step, right? That we talk about that stuff. Like that's really sometimes even a dangerous spot. You never want somebody to be in that open soreness position for too long.
Right.
We want to kind of get them through as quickly as we can, thoroughly, but quickly.
Sure.
Because we're exposed, right? But what I tell people is this, like, recovery is really working in somebody. Okay, let's just say you do have a relapse. And let's just say it was like a 7-hour relapse or a 12-hour relapse. And you know what? After that 12 hours, you're like, whoa, that is not the life I want to live. I want to be back. That's because you have those years of experience of sobriety leading you there. Like it's not a year of darkness or 2 years of darkness. Like you were able to snap back real quick and say, that's not the life I want.
Sure.
I want my life back. It's to those people that I always say, bro, like do not allow the shame to prevent you for your continued road to recovery. Like, you still have all that.
Yeah.
And you can still build upon that.
Well, that's what, that's one of the issues I think with, you were talking about, the timelines of recovery and stuff. Look, I've gotten to the point where, because I went from a guy who came into AA and the first time got it and stayed sober and was this spark plug,
totally
sunbeam for the program and God and the 12 steps and all this stuff, and then relapse, and then had the experience of being the guy that I, on some level, probably had
judged.
Yeah. Probably, minimally, but still, the thought,
you look at him a little differently.
And the thought crosses your mind, like, why don't you just be willing?
Yeah.
Why just make yourself willing?
Yeah.
You've got the power.
Totally.
Just do it. It's like
totally.
And the complete arrogance of any that we chose the date and the hour of our own sobriety is so silly. Thus, to just to think that we can determine the date or the hour of our willingness to move in the direction of the light is so stupid, and it's one of the things I hate. I just don't like about some people in recovery, but it's not that it's about recovery. It's that people can be dicks, period.
Yeah.
So the problem though, the paradigm, generally speaking, or it seems anyways, it's not written anywhere, but you sort of get this idea like, you miss something, or which you probably did, which I'm sure you certainly did. If you have to run and distract yourself to the extent that after years of sobriety, you put more heavy narcotics back into your system, especially in my situation when I had like a house and a wife and kids.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something the matter. So are you missing something? Certainly. But like when I relapsed after 5 years, I really cared about the shame and stuff because I was like this somebody in recovery. I'd sort of built a name and I sponsored all these people. I spoke at meetings and it was this thing. And I had a part of my identity was wrapped up in my persona in AA. And one of the best things that's happened to me in addition to so many others, but one of the best things is that this hilltop that I sort of put myself on, or I found myself on, or whatever, I knocked off. And this identity, this egoic identity that I built around this persona in AA started to chip away. And then after the second relapse at a year or two or whatever it was, it chipped away more. And then I found that in other areas of my life, I began to establish myself more where it was like as a family man, as a father, as a husband, as a business person, started to as my persona in AA was declining by virtue of these relapses, these other areas of my life, even though that's sort of paradoxical, were sort of gaining stride and taking off. And I realized I don't give a fuck about what people think.
Yeah.
Some of my core group of people, I've got 5 guys that I talk to on a daily basis. We're all on a thread together.
Yeah.
But it's what do they say? If you're the smartest guy in the room, there's a problem.
Huge.
I'm not the smartest guy in that room. There's guys that have been sober 15, Matt just got 18 years sober today. And there's family men. They don't cheat on their wives. They don't have weird, not to say it's weird. I mean, people struggle with it, but side gambling or porn addictions.
Those are all addictions.
100%. And I mean, they pay their taxes. They're entrepreneurs. They about half of them or more actually, and they're just solid guys who raise good kids. And we have a blast together. And they keep me strong. They're not macho in that sense, but they're real men.
Yeah.
They're good men.
Yeah.
They're good. So I bounce stuff off of them. I go to my meetings and if they're like, hey man, you should look at something. I'm like, oh fuck, I got to look at something. But if the guy in AA looks at me sideways because I had 5 years at one time and now I'm a year and a half, I don't give a But I did it one time.
I know.
I did it one time.
I appreciate that. I really do, because I think that just comes with life experience, man.
It does.
It really just comes with experience, the way we look at others and the empathy we have for others. The judgment comes from insecurity. It just does.
Sure.
We judge other people because we're insecure about ourselves. We glean that empathy when we're very confident about ourselves and we're able to have, that empathy for others. We could be vulnerable.
Well, I think that there's a paradigm though that's mistaken, and I can't say it's 12-step recovery. I certainly can't say it's AA or NA inherently, because it's not written in any of the literature.
Right.
But it's a human thing that's mixed with these AA or these 12-step fellowships, and it's kind of like how a cult springs up off of a good faith tradition, whether it's Christianity or something else. Then you have David Koresh's, and it's whoa, what the hell are you doing? It's so people that think that you make yourself willing, did you snap your finger and get off of the bar stool and walk into a meeting one day?
Right.
I mean, if you really look back at those experiences, don't you sort of see that maybe there was some lawful unfolding in the universe that allowed you to have clarity for a moment, and combined with that clarity, you had the ability to walk into that direction of that clarity? It's no, I just made myself willing. It's
no, I 100% believe that that is the element that keeps us sober, that's the element that leads us there, is that there has to be some sort of spiritual aspect to it. There just has to be. There has to be something greater than me. And I think that's the narcissism that we as drug addicts,
generally,
that's what we are. I mean, the whole world is us. I'm the most powerful person in the world. I control everything, but that's the narcissism of a drug addict in their disease. Right. But then when we let that go, we realize that we are not the most powerful people in this world, that there are other things that are much more powerful than us. And we, surrendering to that, just surrendering to the idea that I don't have full control over everything, right, is the beginning, I think, to allowing that spirituality to enter your life and allow you to build a life. That being said, an amazing conversation. Thank you for coming on the podcast and just kind of, I always say, shooting the shit about sobriety.
Appreciate it.
I love it because during a pandemic, there's hardly any meetings that are happening in person. All of them are by Zoom. So to be able to do a podcast with somebody else and just kind of talk in human level, and to see somebody else who has made it through recovery and is just on the road and living a successful life, I always love hearing about their stories. So thank you for checking out this edition of the podcast, Escaping Rock Bottom. We will see you back here for the next episode. This podcast is sponsored by Cornerstone Healing Center, where they guide people through a transformative experience and into lasting recovery. They focus on addiction, trauma, family systems, and co-occurring disorders. If you want more information on how to get sober, call them at 1-888-320-7992 or check out their website, scottsdalecornerstone.com.